The night it began, no one heard the warning, except the dog. Not the farmers, dead asleep in their creaking houses. Not the animals, locked in barns that smelled of dry hay and diesel. Not even the sheriff, who wouldn't believe the call until it was too late. But Shadow heard. He always did. The wind that night was off, hot, sharp, like it was slicing through the fields. The sky looked wrong too, not just dark but tainted, like a bruise was spreading across the stars. The moon, which usually cast soft silver across the hills of Red Hollow, was hiding behind angry clouds. The town felt unsettled, like something held its breath. Shadow had been pacing for nearly an hour, ears pricked, tail still. Every creak in the house made him stiffen. Every gust of wind drew a low growl from his throat. His owner, Tom Granger, noticed. "What's gotten into you, boy?" Tom muttered, adjusting the blanket over his legs. At 73, Tom was more bone than muscle, with a spine that ached like it was mourning every year. A widower of 2 years, he lived alone in an aging farmhouse on the edge of town, surrounded by acres of wild grass, a rusted tractor, and the ghost of a life he once had. Shadow was his only companion, a golden retriever with an old soul and a coat that shimmered gold when the sun touched it. He didn't bark much, didn't chase squirrels or beg for treats, but he watched, always watched. Tom had found him, or maybe Shadow had found Tom, 5 months earlier, limping along the edge of Highway 9, ribs showing, formatted with mud and blood. Someone had hit him and left him. Tom took him in, didn't ask questions. He just knew. Something broken in that dog matched something broken in him. And now Shadow was pacing like the world was about to break open. Then it hit. A crack in the wind. A distant pop. And suddenly, the sharp, unmistakable scent of smoke. Shadow froze. His head lifted. My nose twitched. Tail shot straight. Tom smelled it next. Faint. Acidic. Wrong. He sat up straighter. No. Grabbing his cane, he pushed off the recliner and made his way to the front porch. Shadow was already there, body tense, eyes locked on the horizon. And there it was. Far across the fields, a red glow lit the sky. Faint, flickering, but rising. Smoke climbed into the clouds like a crooked finger pointing to hell. Another barn. Not again, Tom whispered. Shadow didn't wait. He leapt off the porch before Tom could say a word, bounding through tall grass like a bolt of gold. Shadow, Tom called, but it was useless. The dog was gone. The old Miller barn had stood for nearly a century. Generations of animals born under its beams. Paint long peeled, wood blackened by storms and summers. But still standing. Until now. By the time Shadow reached it, the flames were already inside the roof. They licked through the rafters, orange tongues hungrily devouring dry wood. The heat pulsed like a living thing. Smoke poured out in thick black waves. But the barn wasn't empty. Shadow heard them first, high-pitched bleats, hoarse cries, stomping hooves. Trapped inside were 3 goats and a calf, pinned in the far corner. Too panicked to move, too frightened to find escape. Shadow ran the perimeter, looking for a way in. The front doors were engulfed. The side walls groaned with pressure. Then a gap, near the back, where years of storms had kicked in a few boards. Just wide enough, just low enough. Shadow lunged in. The moment he passed the threshold, the heat hit harder. His fur curled. His lungs burned. Smoke wrapped around him like a wet cloth dipped in fire. But he didn't stop. He barked, loud, commanding, sharp. The animals cried harder, backing away from the flames. Shadow could see the gate. Wooden. Latched. He ran to it. Bit the latch. Yanked. Nothing. He jumped, clamped his jaw again, pulled harder. Click. The gate swung open. The animals burst out, slipping on hay and ash, bleeding with terror. Shadow nudged them toward the back wall, toward the gap. They stumbled out one by one. Shadow turned to follow. Then I heard it. A whimper. Small. Faint. Not a goat. Not a calf. Something else. He scanned the shadows, eyes watering from smoke. And there, in the far corner, tied to a post. A puppy. Its fur singed. Eyes wide. Rope tangled tight around its neck. It couldn't even crawl. Shadow bolted. The floor behind him cracked. The roof sagged. He reached the pup, bit the rope. Pulled. Yanked. Tugged with everything he had. The rope snapped. The puppy collapsed into his chest, too weak to move. Shadow picked it up gently by the scruff and turned. The fire exploded. The roof collapsed behind them. Shadow sprinted. Through smoke. Through heat. Through fire. Out the gap. Into the night. Tom arrived 10 minutes later, wheezing, flashlight shaking in his hand. The sheriff's truck pulled up behind him, red and blue lights slicing the smoke. Sheriff Lane stepped out, mouth tight. That's the third one this month. Tom didn't respond. He was already on his knees next to Shadow, who stood over the rescued puppy, tail still, chest heaving. Is that another dog? Lane asked. Tom nodded. Tied up in there. Left to burn. Jesus. Lane looked at the barn. Then at Shadow. Your dog did this. Tom wiped his face. He saved them. All of them. Lane crouched beside the pup, who whimpered softly. We've got a problem on our hands, the sheriff muttered. Yeah, Tom said. But we've got a hero too. Shadow didn't move. His eyes were fixed on the tree line, behind the barn, where the fire hadn't started naturally, where someone had stood, and watched, and walked away. That night, Shadow wouldn't sleep. Tom tried coaxing him onto the old rug, even gave him a piece of leftover steak. But Shadow sat by the door, still, waiting. The rescued puppy lay curled in a blanket beside the hearth, twitching in its sleep. Tom watched them both, a storm of thoughts churning in his mind. 3 fires in 1 month. Each one further from town. Each one targeting a barn. But this time something was different. Something darker. Someone had tied that puppy up. I left it. Intended it to die. That wasn't just arson. That was cruelty. And somehow Shadow knew. Knew it was coming. Knew where to go. Knew how to save them. At sunrise, the sheriff returned with a fire investigator from the city. Tom stood beside Shadow, watching them pick through the blackened rubble. There was an accelerant, the investigator said. Kerosene, maybe gasoline. Definitely intentional. Lane cursed under his breath. Someone's escalating. The investigator turned. How'd you know about the fire so fast? Tom nodded at Shadow. The man blinked. You're kidding. Lane shook his head. Nope. The dog took off like a missile. Got there before we did. Saved a calf, 3 goats, and that pup. The investigator stared at Shadow, who sat in the dirt, soot-streaked, but calm. That's one hell of a dog. Tom smiled faintly. He's more than that. He's a guardian. The puppy stirred beside them, letting out a soft yip. Shadow looked down and licked its head. Lane watched the gesture. Think he's got more in him? Tom looked out at the fields. I think he's just getting started. The fire didn't sleep. Even when the last ember died, the scent of smoke clung to the town like a warning. And Shadow didn't sleep either. He sat by the window that night, watching the fields, ears twitching at every rustle. The rescued puppy, now wrapped in an old towel and curled at Tom's feet, snored softly. Tom, exhausted from the adrenaline and chaos, had drifted into a shallow sleep in his chair. But Shadow was still. He knew what no one else knew yet. This wasn't over. The fire hadn't been random. He could smell the chemicals, accelerants, sharp and unnatural. He could feel the intent. Someone had done this. And they weren't finished. At sunrise, Red Hollow looked the same. But it felt different. The sun broke over the fields, casting golden light on barns, fences, and pickup trucks. But that light touched ashes now. It revealed blackened wood and scorched grass. The Miller family, who had been gone for the weekend, returned to a smoldering skeleton where their barn once stood. Their animals, alive thanks to Shadow, huddled in makeshift pens. The news spread fast. 3rd fire in 4 weeks. The first 2 had been dismissed as freak accidents. Electrical issues. Lightning strike. This time, no one was calling it an accident. The town was on edge. Sheriff Lane posted deputies along the northern ridge and ordered patrols near every farm. The volunteer fire crew inspected water tanks and checked their hoses. Farmers carried buckets, filled barrels. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones at the general store. What kind of sicko sets fire to barns with animals inside? Did you hear there was a puppy in the last one? Tied up. Left to die. Tom Granger's dog saved them. Ran right into the fire. That old dog. No, new one. Golden retriever. Smart as a whip. They say he knew before the fire started. Tom didn't care much for gossip. But he did care that Shadow wasn't eating. You've got to rest, boy, he murmured, kneeling beside him. You did good. You saved them. But you've got to let yourself rest. Shadow wouldn't move from the window. The puppy, now named Ember, followed him everywhere. Whimpered when she couldn't see him. Tried to crawl into his fur while he sat guard. Tom watched the 2 dogs and felt something ancient stir in his chest. It wasn't quite scary, but it wasn't peaceful either. He knew this kind of silence. The kind before a storm. And storms didn't ask permission before they hit. 3 days later, the fire came again. This time it was the Andersons' place. An old storage shed behind their barn. It went up like paper in the wind. But Shadow wasn't there in time. By the time the flames lit the sky, it was too late to save anything inside. No animals this time. Just tools. A tractor. A memory of safety. But the message was clear. The arsonist wasn't targeting random places. They were circling, tightening. And whoever they were watching. Sheriff Lane stood in the ashes the next morning, jaw clenched. No prints. No tire tracks. No witnesses. Whoever's doing this knows the land. Tom stood beside him, Shadow at his heel. Or they know how to hide. Lane looked at the dog. Think your golden angel's got any more predictions in him? Shadow didn't bark. He just stared across the field. Eyes narrow, body still. Tom followed his gaze. There was a scarecrow out there. Tattered. Learning. Nothing unusual. Except for the charred bandana tied around its neck. Tom's stomach dropped. Lane saw it too. He jogged out. Yanked the bandana off the post. Sniffed it. Kerosene. Shadow growled. Tom whispered. He's leaving signs now. Warnings. Lane nodded grimly. Or invitations. That night, Tom loaded the shotgun he hadn't touched in years. He kept it by the door. Shadow didn't move from his post. Ember curled beside him. But Tom couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house made his pulse spike. Every gust of wind made him grip the shotgun tighter. He felt 80 again. Useless. Fragile. But he wasn't alone. Shadow stayed at the window until 3:14 a.m. Then, without a sound, he stood. And growled. Tom was already on his feet. What is it? Shadow turned, barked once. Urgent. Demanding. Ember stirred. Shadow nudged her back gently, as if saying, You stay. He bolted for the door. Tom grabbed the gun. Not without me. They followed the glow through the tree line, faint, but growing. This wasn't a full blaze yet. It was the beginning. The kindling. Shadow led them to the edge of the Jacobs cornfield. The barn was at the center, old, creaky, filled with hay. And smoke. It slithered out from under the door. Shadow barked, sharp and furious. Tom ran forward, heart hammering, and kicked open the side entrance. A wick of fire snaked along the floor. Just started, spreading across an oily trail. And beside it, a lantern. Lit. Still warm. But no one was in sight. Shadow burst past Tom and dove into the barn. Tom yelled after him, but Shadow was gone. Moments later, barks. Sharp. Desperate. Tom stumbled in after him. In the corner, a crate. Nailed shut. Movement inside. Shadow was pawing at it, barking hard. Tom raised the butt of the shotgun and smashed the top. Inside, for kittens. Alive. Terrified. He scooped them up. Shadow herded them toward the door. Just as the flames caught. They made it out seconds before the wall collapsed. Another barn was saved. More lives pulled from the fire. But Tom didn't feel relieved. He felt rage. Someone had placed that crate there. Someone had watched the smoke rise. Someone wanted to hurt them. And Shadow, he was hunting now. Not just a warning. He wanted to catch the fire starter. And this time, he was close. Fire changed everything. Not because of the damage. That part was minimal. Not because of the lives lost. Thankfully, none. But because this time, the fire left behind something it never had before. Footprints. Sheriff Lane squatted over them at first light. They were faint, partial impressions in the scorched soil just behind the Jacobs barn. But they were there. Clear enough to make your stomach tighten. Boots, he muttered. Size 10 or 11. The tread pattern looks like standard issue workwear. Tom Granger stood next to him, arms folded, face drawn. Shadow sat by his right leg, ears forward, eyes locked on the prints. Means he's on foot, Lane continued. Knows the land. Probably local. Tom nodded, slow. Knows how to disappear too. Every time he lights a match, he's already fading back into the trees. Lane sighed. Except this time, he left us a trail. The ash crackled under Shadow's paws as he moved closer. He sniffed the edges of the print, then turned his head sharply to the north. Lane caught the motion. He's got something? Tom didn't answer. He was already following Shadow. The trail wasn't clean. It crossed 2 fenced fields, slid down a muddy gully, then weaved into a dense patch of woods most locals avoided. It was private land, technically still owned by the Bennett family, but no one had seen Bennett in town for over a decade. Shadow moved with purpose. Nose low, tail stiff, body tense like a wire about to snap. Tom followed close behind, boots slipping in wet leaves. The morning mist clung to everything. Branches scratched his arms. His back screamed in protest. But he kept going. Because Shadow was on fire. Not literally, of course, but in his movements, in his focus, Tom could feel it. This was no longer just a hunt. It was personal. They climbed over a rotted fence and entered what must have once been a homestead. An old cabin leaned sideways in a clearing. The roof had collapsed. A rusted swing creaked on a single chain. And in the grass, a circle of blackened earth. Tom moved closer. Shadow growled. "Easy, boy." He knelt and touched the circle. Still warm. Near it, a canister. Empty. Labeled flammable. Behind that, a duffel bag. Inside were rags soaked in fuel, 2 lighters, and a notebook. Tom flipped through it with a gloved hand. Dates. Maps. Descriptions of barns. Schedules. Notes about patrols. And then, one line that made Tom freeze. Granger Farm, October 18th. Night. Watch the dog. Tom read it again. "Son of a," he muttered. Shadow barked suddenly. Sharp, low, warning. Movement. Just beyond the trees. Tom dropped the notebook, grabbed his shotgun, and turned. A figure dashed through the brush, all black hoodie and sprinting legs. Shadow exploded into action. "Go!" Tom shouted. They chased. Branches whipped past Tom's face. Shadow tore through the underbrush, barking, closing distance. The figure ahead stumbled, caught themselves, kept running. They reached the river. The man jumped, hit the water, went under. Shadow stopped at the edge, barking furiously. Tom arrived, panting, legs on fire. But the current was strong and fast. The man was gone. Back at the cabin, Lane inspected the scene while forensics took samples. "You're lucky," he said. "If Shadow hadn't caught the trail when he did." Tom didn't respond. He just stared at the notebook. Lane asked quietly, "You think he's targeting you?" Tom nodded. "It's not just about barns anymore. He's leaving messages. Watching us. And the note about Shadow? He sees him as a threat." Lane looked at the dog. "He's right." The town went on alert. Deputies were stationed near every barn. Cameras were installed. The mayor held a meeting in the high school gym. Tom didn't attend. He stayed home, reinforced the barn, installed motion lights, and kept the shotgun by the door. Shadow never left the porch. Even Ember, small, curious Ember, stayed quiet, sensing the storm in the air. That night, Shadow didn't sleep. Neither did Tom. At 2:33 a.m., a light flickered near the field. Shadow stood. Tom followed. They crept along the edge of the corn, every breath a ghost in the cold night. Then, movement. A figure, crouching by the barn. Shadow growled. "Launch forward." Tom ran. The man lit something, a fuse, a flare, and turned. Shadow slammed into him. They tumbled hard. The flare rolled into the dry grass. Tom stomped it out. By the time he turned, the fight was over. Shadow had the man pinned. Tom aimed the shotgun. "Move, and you'll regret it." Lane arrived within minutes. This time, they had him. "I am 24 years old. Evan Bryce. Former volunteer firefighter. Dishonorably discharged for misconduct. He wanted revenge," Lane said. Claimed nobody respected him. Said he wanted to scare the town. Wake people up. Tom shook his head. He almost burned it to the ground. Lane looked at Shadow. "But your dog saved it." In the days that followed, Shadow became a local legend. The town held a small ceremony. Kids drew pictures. A plaque was made for the fire station. News crews came. Shadow handled it all with quiet dignity. Tom watched it all from his porch, heart full. Ember curled beside Shadow. She looked up to him now, not just as a friend, but as a protector, a guide. Shadow watched the fields. Still, calm, but alert. Because heroes don't rest. They just wait for the next fire. The trial began 3 weeks later, and Red Hollow had never seen anything like it. The town courthouse, usually reserved for land disputes and petty theft, was now packed shoulder to shoulder with reporters, law students, and half the county. They called it the Firestarter case. Evan Bryce stood at the defense table in a wrinkled shirt, jaw clenched, eyes dark and restless. Across from him sat Sheriff Lane, arms folded, and Tom Granger, with Shadow lying calmly by his feet. The court had allowed the dog to attend. After all, he wasn't just a witness to the story. He was the reason there was a story left to tell. Tom had never testified before. His voice shook at first, but as he told the story, from the night of the first fire to the takedown near his barn, something steadied inside him. When he mentioned the note that said, "Watch the dog," Shadow lifted his head as if on cue. The courtroom buzzed. "He saved lives," Tom said. "Not just mine. Not just the animals. He saved all of us. Because he saw what we couldn't." The defense attorney tried to dismiss it all as coincidence. "A dog can't predict fire, Mr. Granger." Tom didn't flinch. He didn't predict it. He sensed it. And he acted. That's more than most men did. Lane testified next. Calm. Professional. Then furious. "This man set 10 fires," he said, pointing to Evan. "He endangered children, families, livestock. And for what? Because he felt invisible? Because people forgot his name?" He gestured to Shadow. "We remember heroes in this town. That dog didn't need credit. He just needed to protect." And that's exactly what he did. The trial stretched on for 6 days. Witnesses, experts, video evidence. But the public had already made up their minds. And so had the jury. Guilty on all counts. 10 counts of arson. 4 counts of attempted murder. Lifetime ban from fire service. 25 years without parole. When the verdict was read, the courtroom erupted. Shadow didn't move. But Tom felt him exhale. Outside the courthouse, the crowd gathered. "Shadow! Shadow!" The kids chanted. Reporters shoved microphones in Tom's face. "Mr. Granger, did you train him to detect fire?" "No," Tom replied. "He just knew." "Will Shadow receive any official award?" Tom smiled. "He doesn't care about awards. He cares about people and animals and doing the right thing." The mayor stepped forward and presented Shadow with a medal, the Red Hollow Medal of Honor. First ever awarded to a non-human. Tom hung it around Shadow's neck. "Well-deserved, partner." The dog licked his hand. But behind the celebrations, Tom knew something deeper was happening. Shadow had changed the town. People were kinder, more alert, more connected. Farmers started neighborhood patrols. Teenagers volunteered at the firehouse. Strangers helped each other rebuild barns. The trial had ended, but the impact was just beginning. And Shadow? He wasn't done. He still woke early. I still checked the window. Still watched the fields like a sentinel. Because real guardians don't quit after one battle. They stay ready. For the next spark. For the next cry for help. For the next soul that needs saving. A month after the trial, a young boy showed up at Tom's farm. He had a kitten in a cardboard box and tears in his eyes. "She got stuck in a drain pipe," the boy said. "I didn't know what to do, but my mom said Shadow might help." Tom raised an eyebrow. "Did she now?" The boy nodded. "He's a hero, right?" Tom looked at Shadow. The dog was already sniffing the box, tail wagging. "Yeah," Tom said quietly. "He is." And so the legend grew. Some heroes vanish into history. Others become legends. Shadow became both. It had been 4 months since the trial, and Red Hollow had changed. You could feel it in the way people greeted each other at the market, in how farmers kept water barrels full near their barns, in how kids stopped to pet every passing dog, as if it might be the next miracle waiting to happen. But no miracle had matched Shadow. Tom Granger, once a recluse with tired eyes and a creaking back, now found himself at the heart of something he never asked for but quietly cherished. Shadow's story had gone beyond county lines. State news covered it. National channels picked it up. Offers came from talk shows, documentary teams, even a publisher. Tom declined most of them. "We're not doing this for fame," he told them. He already did the important part. He saved lives. But one offer did resonate. A school program. A new fire safety initiative named after Shadow, Guardian Paws. It would teach children how to prepare for emergencies, recognize fire hazards, and respect animals as partners in safety. Tom agreed to that one. Once a month, he and Shadow visited schools in nearby towns. Ember came too, now healthier, fluffier, and every bit as curious. Tom spoke gently, simply. He didn't sugarcoat the fires, but he emphasized the resilience that followed. Shadow sat beside him as children asked questions. How did he know where the fire was? Was he scared? Can dogs really be heroes? Tom always answered the last one the same way. They don't wear capes, but they know when to act, and they never think about credit. That's what makes them heroic. He would watch Shadow during those sessions, calm, noble, patient, and feel something twist in his chest. Not grief, not pride, something quieter, something sacred. But time moves, even in the most storybook towns. And with time came age. Shadow began slowing down. His morning patrols grew shorter. His naps are longer. The sparkle in his eyes softened. Tom noticed, but didn't panic. "You've earned your rest," he'd whisper. Ember, now almost full-grown, began shadowing him more, as if sensing the weight her mentor carried. The torch wasn't passed. Not yet. But the transition had begun. And then came the call that changed everything again. It was a stormy night in late March. Thunder rolled over Red Hollow like a war drum. Lightning lit the sky in jagged bursts. The kind of night that made animals restless and windows rattle. Tom had just finished closing the barn doors when the radio crackled. "Sierra 1, we have a missing person alert. 9-year-old female. Last seen near Briarwood Creek. Repeat, missing child, possible flood zone." Tom froze. He looked at Shadow. The dog was already standing. They didn't wait for a second dispatch. Tom grabbed his coat, loaded Ember into the truck, and called the sheriff. "We're heading to Briarwood. Shadow's coming. I've got a feeling." Lane didn't argue. When they reached the creek, searchlights were already swinging. Deputies called the girl's name. Drones hovered above trees. But the current was rising, and time was slipping. Shadow jumped from the truck before it stopped. He sniffed once, twice. Then I ran. Ember followed. Tom and 2 deputies ran after them. Through trees, over mud, down toward the swollen creek. Then, a bark. Sharp, urgent, repeated. They reached a fallen tree wedged across the water. Shadow stood at the base, paws braced. And there, clinging to the underside, was the girl. Soaked, shivering, eyes wide with terror. "Hang on," one of the deputies yelled. Shadow didn't wait. He crawled out onto the log, slow, careful, until he was beside her. She reached out. He let her grab his fur. She held tight. Ember barked from the bank. Tom waded in, water up to his waist, helping the deputy climb the trunk. Together, they pulled her to safety. The girl collapsed into her mother's arms minutes later. Shadow stood still, soaked, but proud. That rescue made the front page of 3 newspapers. Guardian Paws strikes again. Dog who fought fire now saves child from flood. Shadow, more than a hero. Tom read the headlines with quiet eyes. Shadow curled on the porch beside Ember. "Just another day's work, huh?" Tom whispered. Shadow thumped his tail. The following summer, a bronze statue was unveiled in the town square. Shadow, mid-stride, head lifted, eyes forward. Kids gathered around it, taking pictures. Tourists stopped to read the plaque. "In honor of Shadow, the guardian of Red Hollow, who taught us that heroes can walk on 4 legs and change the world with silent courage." 2 years passed. Ember became a certified therapy dog. Tom started writing a book. Shadow's pace slowed further. Some days, he didn't make it to the fence line. Other days, he sat on the porch, eyes on the horizon, but not chasing anything. Just watching. One morning, he didn't rise. Tom found him under his favorite oak tree, head on his paws, eyes closed. Peaceful. Still. The town held a ceremony. Flags were lowered. Candles lit. Schoolchildren sang a song they'd written just for him. Tom didn't speak. He just placed a collar, old, worn, and beloved, at the foot of the statue, and walked away. Shadow's story didn't end there. Because heroes like him never really leave. They echo in every barn rebuilt. Every child who remembers fire drills. Every rescue dog is adopted. Every young voice says, "I want to help." The Guardian Paws program spread to other counties, then other states. One day, even national. And everywhere it went, Shadow's name was spoken, not as a dog, but as a symbol of bravery, of service, of love. Tom lived another 10 years. Long enough to see Ember retire. Long enough to see a young volunteer bring him a pup and say, "She's smart. Brave too. I named her Light." Tom smiled. "She'll do just fine." And as the sun dipped behind the hills, he looked toward that field one last time and whispered, "Thank you, boy. You didn't just save this town. You saved me." Shadow never answered. He didn't need to. His legacy had already taken root. In the ashes of fear, he had planted hope. And hope, unlike fire, never dies. The lesson: not all heroes wear badges. Some wear fur and walk beside us with quiet grace. They don't ask for medals. They ask for trust, love, purpose. Shadow was more than a rescue dog. He was a mirror, reflecting back the courage hidden in every person who had forgotten their strength. He reminded a broken town that healing begins with presence, and that sometimes the quietest hearts carry the loudest legacy. Share his story so others might remember. One life, no matter how small, can protect many. And one hero, no matter how silent, can change everything.